CapitolView, the weekly program where we talk about state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Charlie Wheeler, head of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you, Bruce. It's always good to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And also Hannah Meisel, State House reporter for the Daily Line. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Great. This just in today, as we're taping, the state Supreme Court has ruled today that a former lobbyist who worked for the Illinois Federation of Teachers is entitled to collect a pension from teachers' retirement system. This had been a very controversial case that kind of blew up in 2011 when the Chicago media had reported that, hey, there are folks who have never really been on the public payroll who have been granted state pensions. In this case, the person in question was Dave, and I'm probably going to screw his name up, Piccioli?
Piccioli, I think it is.
Yeah, a longtime lobbyist for Illinois Federation of Teachers, was granted a state pension by virtue of one day working as a substitute teacher in a Springfield School District elementary school. Charlie, can you keep us updated on what the case said?
Well, what the argument is, and if you look at it, it has a lot of weight in my view, that this is manipulating the system. Mm-hmm. Here this guy is, he's basically a lobbyist, works for the teachers union, but by virtue of the fact that he spent one day in a classroom, he's entitled to be a member of the teachers' retirement system. Mm-hmm. And the argument being made is, yeah, this was a phony deal. He shouldn't get that kind of benefit. But the Supreme Court majority said the way the Constitution is written, that he is qualified and that benefit can't be taken away from him. Yeah. And this is a decision that obviously only affects one individual, this particular decision, but to me it's just another nail in the coffin of the efforts to try and strip benefits from people to try and deal with this humongous unfunded liability. Yeah. The court has said once again that if you're in the system, whatever the benefits are when you went in, whatever improvements are made while you're there, they can't be taken away. Now, of course, you could say, okay, I don't want the benefits, that's fine. I'm in the state university retirement system. I could tell CSRS, okay, the state's in really bad shape, I'm just going to forego my pension. Not going to do that, but that would be okay. But on the other hand, the General Assembly and the governor and CSRS can't tell me, hey, you're going to have to lose half your pension because we're really in a tight fiscal squeeze.
I think one thing that impressed me about today's ruling was that it was a 4-3 ruling as opposed to previous ones which we've seen as unanimous. And I think what struck me most about this wasn't necessarily the majority view, but the dissent. It painted just a yucky picture of how laws are made in Springfield. In this particular case, there was substantial evidence that the union itself, that the Illinois Federation of Teachers, that the lobbyists who benefited from this actually wrote the law. And in my mind, rightly or wrongly, it almost seemed as if the court was saying, we have to, the law is the law. Or the Constitution is the Constitution. And
I think that's what they were saying.
Yeah, but they also seemed to be holding their nose while they were doing it in this particular case.
Yeah. Well, this also adds, I mean, we won't see, don't get me wrong, we're not going to see it for a very long time. However, in maybe 15, 20 years, if if certain things change in the legislature, for example, if Speaker Madigan eventually does stop being the speaker, and other forces come in, there is a growing movement to say, well, God, if we're going to open up the Constitution and allow for a graduated income tax, well, we can easily open up the Constitution and allow for, changes to the pension clause. The pension clause, this ironclad thing that has prevented, it prevented SB1, the big pension overhaul law passed in late 2013, prevented, it's almost the 4-year anniversary of, the Supreme Court coming down hard on that. The pension clause is, in this ruling, it really dictates a lot of, the parameters of our discussion around pensions. And it also as a result, dictates our state budget.
Yeah, and
But see, I would argue, even if you were to abolish the pension clause tomorrow, you can't go back and take benefits away because it's a contractual relationship and you can't void that contract. Now there are people who would argue the other side of it, but I'm pretty well convinced, having followed this stuff and having done some of the research, that there's no way you can get out from under that $130 billion liability.
I think it's
like Bruce said, you
135.
could abolish all the systems tomorrow so that no teacher, no university employee, no state worker, no public employee anywhere would have a pension. And that would be fine, there'd be no problem. But for the people who are already in, there's that contractual relationship that can't be diminished or impaired. And since it's a contractual relationship, you can't retroactively undo it. Going forward, yes, but going backwards, you can't. And contracts are protected not only in our Constitution, but in the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, Illinois is not the only state that has this element of its Constitution which says pension benefits cannot be diminished. But I think you're right, Charlie. You know, you're as good a lawyer as me, but I do think that, yeah. I mean, it's to some degree, I think, in a sense, almost what's fair is fair. And if I've entered into some sort of a job with the expectation that I'm going to be getting a pension benefit, then there is a contract there. Illinois is not, of course. I mean, we always talk about Illinois because that's where we live, and we do have a huge unfunded pension obligation. I think it's close to 135 billion than 130, but we quibble. At some point in time, you wonder, will we say, you know, we've established tiers now, so we've tried to give later employees lesser benefits than folks that have come in earlier, and that's clearly fine to do. At some point, will we reach a point where, you know what, we're not going to do pensions at all? We'll give you the world's greatest 401k, but we can't do pensions at all. Is that anywhere on our horizon?
Oh, I think ultimately that could very well be what would happen. But you still have that, be it 130, be it 135, and it's going to go up over time because the schedule in law that we use to make these payments is structured such that for the next 8 or 10 years, the payments are going to go up from year to year. Now, with the new people at the tier 2, and now the one that went in, I guess, last year or the year before, tier 3, yeah, they're going to get less. And when all the old guys like me are gone, and it's all the new people, yeah, the obligations will be much smaller. But until then, you have a problem. And not to get too much in the weeds, but there's also a question: will tier 2 survive a challenge in a couple years that the benefits aren't comparable to what someone would get under Social Security? And if it can't survive that challenge, then all the teachers in the state would go on Social Security, would be one outcome. And with Social Security, you have to pay that tax if you're the employer. You can't put it off for decades. You either pay it or you go to jail.
So we'd see everybody in the legislature and the governor's office in jail? I don't think so.
Probably not.
Not all at once.
Not all at once, no. I mean, we've got a track record of putting them in jail, but not necessarily for skimming pension.
Well, I mean, we've seen gimmicks, and I'll call them gimmicks, where, hey, what we'll do is to legislate our way out of this, to solve this mess. We'll offer deals to folks, take more money now, and reduce the long-term obligation of the state. That hasn't always worked out so well. I mean, to me, I kind of think, you know, you owe a whole bunch of money, and you're trying to convince somebody to take less than what you would otherwise get.
Yeah, and I would say there would be circumstances in which it would make sense for somebody to do that. For example, let's say, heaven forbid, some state workers diagnosed with some incurable cancer. You only have 6 months to live. Yeah. If I'm that state worker, I'm thinking, do I want to take 6 months of my pension, which will be compounded every year thereafter, but I ain't going to be here, and I can't pass it on to my heirs? Or do I want to take a lump sum right now that can be part of my estate, help my kids, my grandkids? In that situation, somebody would be wise to say, I'm going to give up what I might give in the future because I ain't going to be here in the future.
Yeah. Well, I would think that would be a very limited pool.
Oh, sure. And that's why I don't think it's going to be any kind of a huge savings.
Yeah.
The few people who would opt for that.
Yeah. What about the 7-year ramp? I mean, that J.B. Pritzker has talked about. Wall Street doesn't seem that thrilled with it, but they don't seem that disgusted with it either. Our rating hasn't gone down even after that was rolled out. Is that something that might fly?
Well, it's funny because the week of the, couple days after Pritzker's budget, I think all three, but maybe just two of the New York ratings agencies, came out with they were finger wagging, they were warning, but
they also said stable, did they not?
Yeah, it wasn't until after Pritzker actually went to New York a couple of weeks later and made his pitch to investors and the credit rating agencies, and they came back with, okay, like, we don't love it, but we're not going to downgrade you. Sounds like you're doing okay, which, in the financial crisis, or in the aftermath, I should say, credit agencies got a bad rap for not, kind of turning a blind eye, for not sounding the alarm sooner. It's hard to say. I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know if they're being appropriately, washing their hands of Illinois. I don't know if they're appropriately warning. I'm not sure. Yeah. Although, it wouldn't do anyone a ton of good to downgrade Illinois into junk status. And again, we're still, Fitch is the only of the three that has us 2 notches above junk status. Moody's and S&P still have us dangling 1 notch above junk status.
Yeah, which increases our borrowing costs.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in the real world, we're not going to go default on bonds. I think the last time a state defaulted in bonds, I think you have to go back to the Great Depression or something. It was Arkansas. We're Illinois,
and the last
Arkansas.
time Illinois had a problem like that was, I believe, in the 1840s when we had borrowed a lot of money for what were called permanent improvements at the time.
Yeah, canals and whatnot.
Yeah, and we bought back the paper at cents on the dollar. And when, I believe it was Governor Ford came in, he was so embarrassed by that, he pushed through the General Assembly a special property tax to make whole the bondholders.
Well, you know who pushed for the sale of those bonds? Abraham Lincoln. That was one of his crowning achievements as a legislator.
So. But the likelihood of us defaulting, as I said to people, the only way that Illinois is going to default is if the Aztecs were correct on the calendar. Well, that proved not to be the case. And so if we're going to be defaulting, we as a nation, we as the planetary human family have bigger problems to worry about.
Well, yeah, and let's be clear. Illinois has, and I hate to say it, but quite a bit of untapped resources to tax in the event of huge financial problems.
Yeah.
We have a fairly narrow tax base. We don't tax services, we don't tax retirement income. Famously, the tax on food, nobody wants to do that, but it's minimal. And so we could actually, if we got it into a hole, we could expand the tax base, and Wall Street knows that.
Yeah, and the last time we went to the market, and Hannah, you probably know this better than I, we sold bonds not too recently, and they were oversubscribed by a factor of 5 or 6 to 1. In other words, we had demand for more than we were selling, which means that these investors don't say, "Oh God, Illinois is going to go belly up."
Whoopee! They're selling them again.
Yeah, I think we went to market last week.
Was it?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, let's move on for a second and talk about another potential revenue-raising idea, and that's recreational marijuana. A bill just moved forward in the legislature the Senate, I believe, within the last couple of days. A shell bill. Everybody knows that's the bill that's going to contain the provisions to make recreational marijuana legal, but it ain't soup yet. Charlie, are folks getting too excited over, hey, there's nothing there yet?
No, it's pretty typical for the process on complex legislations. The bill is Senate Bill 7, and if you read it, it just says, and I actually copied it down, Senate Bill Section 1, short title, This act may be cited as the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act, period. That's all that the bill says. Got voted out of the Senate Executive Committee 12-4. It's now at amendment stage in the Senate. I would not be surprised, but when it gets passed through the Senate, still just saying, here's the title. And the reason is this is very complex. It's got a lot of moving pieces. Legislation was introduced last session. There were hearings held, and there are a lot of stakeholders, and they're meeting. They're trying to come out to the best compromise possible. And some of it's just very basic questions. For example, if I want to grow pot in my house, should I be allowed to? Should I have to get a special license? How much can I grow? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Law enforcement says, no, we don't want home growers at all. So those are the kind of issues that are going to be hashed out. And
You
people
said
are
hash.
aware of what they are. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, gosh. People are aware of what they are. And at some point in the process, they will come out with a compromise.
Yeah.
I look at there's been like 6,000 bills introduced. I guess more than half of them are shell bills.
Yeah.
They're just moving along, and when the issue gets resolved, the guts will be plunked into this empty boxcar.
Because they have to comply with deadlines. I mean, we
Yeah.
just had 2 deadline weeks, although the Senate kind of ignored deadlines and got waivers for a lot. But, you have to, or else nothing would get done, obviously, because it's here, it's Springfield. But you have to comply with those deadlines. That's why we had so many late nights last week in the House getting things out of committee. The other thing is, yes, these discussions had been ongoing for a very long time, but it wasn't until, not even a month ago that they started having official biweekly meetings about the legislation. So, I've heard grumblings of things are moving too slow.
Well, they're meeting fairly regularly, which is a good thing. I mean, if they're not meeting, what, if anything, should we make of the fact that it was along party lines, the latest vote, 12-4, but all 4 votes were Republicans? Is this going to boil down to a partisan issue? I mean, if it does, the Ds still prevail.
Nah, not at the end of the day. I don't think it'll boil down to be totally partisan.
No.
I think there'll be Republicans who are for it, Democrats who are against it, and vice versa.
Yeah. I mean, we've already seen, there has been a lot of hay made of this resolution. Again, resolution doesn't really not mean anything.
Sure.
But this resolution put forward by Marty Moylan, a representative Democrat from Des Plaines, I feel like he told me back in either November or real early January that he was, getting together people who feel like this is going too fast. I don't think he's ever going to vote for this, but he got 70 or something people on
60 total signees, I think, at last check.
Okay.
I think they got more than 60 now, or at least 60.
Okay.
Okay.
Which
Well,
is a
whatever it
majority.
was, again, it's only a resolution. It doesn't
Sure.
really. It's not real. It's not real.
Yeah.
But there are definitely people who think it's going too fast, but there's a broad spectrum of people in the General Assembly. There's libertarian-minded Republicans who feel like if you want to smoke weed, great. Let's have the state get a cut. Although even though they're libertarians, they're not for taxes per se, but might as well have the state get a cut. And then there's more conservative Democrats, especially people from the suburbs, who just are wary of this.
Yeah.
There's also issues of even Senator Dick Durbin. He raised concerns about, well, what if we start getting more DUIs in Illinois if we legalize pot? Apparently, there's been several studies out of Colorado that has seen a small uptick in DUIs. So there are people who are concerned. But again, I think ultimately this will get done. I don't know if it will get done this spring. Maybe it'll get done in the fall veto session. But it's like a train. It's coming.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to Dan.
I would expect that it'll be this spring, and if not this spring, a year from now, for the reason if you try and do it in the fall veto session, you need the extra votes.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
And so you need 11
Sure.
more in the House, 6 more in the Senate, and I think it's going to be close enough. You're not going to have that kind of a margin.
Yeah. That's what Dan Lynn essentially told me. He's the executive director of the Illinois chapter of the national organization to reform marijuana laws. He says it's going to be this spring or next spring. I took a look at that resolution. resolution and kind of chuckled to myself. One of the whereases is there's a possibility that if we legalized marijuana in Illinois, homeless people would flock here, as if, you know, there's no marijuana where they live. Yeah, it's in there. So, I mean, I kind of think of it as a reefer madness. There's a little bit for everybody. I mean, there's marijuana is bad for kids. Marijuana leads to more DUIs. But it's not really hard language, likelihood or studies show, or, I mean, you know, and let's be clear. I mean, kids shouldn't go around smoking marijuana. I think everybody agrees with that. What Mr. Lynn had told me is that he expects that between 8 and 12 of those signees are going to peel off and eventually vote in favor of a bill, because this resolution doesn't lock them in. It gives them some wiggle room.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that, Governor Pritzker recently told the press that his expectation, there's been a lot of talk about cultivation centers. How many should we allow? The existing ones, of course, say don't allow other ones. Folks that don't have them are say, let's have some more, and folks who live at home are suggesting perhaps we should do it a little more home-based. And you look at the different models around the nation. Washington State, for example, has an almost anything goes policy, and they've granted more than 2,000 licenses to cultivate. And what that's led to is a lot of folks going out of business and the price of marijuana plummeting. In California, I read an article recently, when they legalized recreational marijuana, sales of marijuana at legal outlets declined. It's the takeaway is that marijuana is not incredibly difficult to grow, and once you allow it, there's going to be a lot of it. So what happens to it? Again, I hate to dominate the conversation, but Pritzker had said he expects $170 million from licensing alone. Yeah. And he also said new entrants. I mean, can that $170 million, what does that mean for the state in terms of helping our budget crunch?
I mean, it's not much, but it's nothing to sniff at. You should never turn up your nose at extra revenue. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, like, his proposed budget, he made it very clear from the get-go that his proposed budget is just a bridge, because his ultimate goal is getting a progressive income tax, which again he claims will raise $3.4 billion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about
you look at some of the things he wants to do, though. For example, he wants to put, $50 more million into MAP grants, didn't he say? Yeah. Okay, so if this raises 170, that covers the MAP grants. Yeah. We want to hire 126 more caseworkers for DCFS. I'm guessing for 170 million, you can hire more than 126 caseworkers. So we have huge problems, and every little bit helps to cover some of these things that we know we have to do.
Yeah. And with marijuana, I think you probably want to strike a balance here. So we're not gonna feed a black market, in which case the state gets nothing.
Which is what exists today.
Which is what exists today. Let's talk about the budget here for a second on the graduated income tax. Kafka just recently came up with a report saying that there's a gap between what the governor says it's going to bring in and what reality is. Let's talk about that.
Well, there have been various critiques made saying that, this is only going to raise $3 billion or $3.1 billion when it's implemented, and not the $3.4 billion figure that Governor Pritzker's been using. Well, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability put together a paper that they gave to the legislative leaders. Rich Miller and Capitol Facts posted a link to it on his website, and the conclusion from COGFA is that the net, after you take away the new tax credits, the new property tax credit, the child tax credit, it would net out $3.331 billion, which is roughly $69 million less, 2% less than what the governor had been talking about. Mm-hmm. And from my time covering the legislature and watching it since, the stuff that comes out of COGFA and its predecessor, the Economic and Fiscal Commission, is 100% golden, in the sense that it is totally free of any spin, because the commission is overseen by lawmakers, equal numbers from the Senate and the House, equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. And so there's no political spin. And again, over the years, I found that from other sources, private sources with an axe to grind, like the IPI, or governmental sources with an axe to grind, like bureaus of the budget for various governors of both parties, aren't quite as reliable as these COCFA guys. And it's because it's totally bipartisan, totally balanced. So I would say if their estimates are that he's within 2%, I would go with that.
Okay, so we're still got a $69 million gap. Does the COFCA thing include, since we were talking about 170 million, that would plug that gap, would it not?
Yeah,
Okay.
and 69 million is a lot of money, but on a base of, what, 38 billion, 69 million is pretty small.
Yeah.
It's like 2 cents on the dollar. You could argue almost that it's a rounding error.
Mm-hmm. Scary, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah. But like a billion is 1,000 million,
Yeah.
if you think about it.
Yeah. Real quickly, because we're almost out of time here. Recently, it's been found that there are a lot of folks working for DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, caseworkers who fibbed in their reports, and apparently in some cases, perhaps in court. This has been going on for 4 or 5 years or so. The Inspector General has been issued reports. It's only now being picked up on by the media. Why did it take so long?
I mean, I feel like there just weren't enough people to sound the alarm.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that inspectors general, they tend to view their job as like more bureaucratic,
Mm-hmm.
and for good reasons. They don't necessarily. They're not supposed to necessarily be pushing one thing or another. They're supposed to be pushing good government, and they do that through their audits and reports.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like they are not in the business of sounding the alarm.
No, I
And
agree.
maybe-
I agree with you. They're out there to here's
Yes.
the information. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
maybe they should be. Maybe that should be another job. I don't know. But like when I reported on this, back maybe like a month ago, I talked to the Inspector General who did she was like, I don't understand. There are so many reports that we've done throughout the years. She's new, to be clear, but like DCFS does not take those suggestions
Okay.
over and over.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk about it because it's an extremely important topic, but we are out of time. And so thank you for joining us at Capitol View. We'll see you next week.